Do that. Tell the story, mate.
I declare the meeting open, councillors. I'd like to do the acknowledgement of country first.
Sorry. I'm sure.
Should I move up as councillor?
If you'd like to, yes.
Oh, I don't want to be too far. The action.
Oh, gosh. Council acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands where we work and live. Council celebrates the diversity of Aboriginal peoples with the ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of the New South Wales Central Tablelands. Recording meeting, Mr. Dean, could you give a rundown of this, please?
Yes, Chairman. Members of the public are advised that proceedings of this meeting, other than confidential matters, are being recorded and made publicly available on the council website. Persons attending the meeting should refrain from making any defamatory statements.
Is there any apologies, councillors, members?
Councillor Capel, I believe.
Yes.
I've moved to second acceptor. Councillor Leslie, Councillor McKibben, all four. That's carried. Thank you. Confirmation of the minutes. The ordinary meeting up in Macquarie County Council held on the 9th of October 2020. Member McKibben.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move them, but I do note.
Can I have a second, please? Councillor Fry, yep. Councillor McKibben.
I do note that I think it's the last page, the report of the confidential committee of the whole council in relation to the general manager's request for special leave. That I think you need to check the mover and the seconder. I do not believe that motion was proposed by Councillor Kingham and seconded by Councillor Reynolds. I've got a reasonable view it may have been moved by yourself and seconded by me, because you will recall that it was actually proposed by Councillor Reynolds and he asked that his vote against the motion be noted.
Mr. Chairman, we can check that.
We can check that on the video.
You can check it on the recording, I'm
Yes,
sure.
yes.
Yep.
And
I think you are 100% correct there.
and
And we'll adjust it and we'll advise of that. Any other comments, councillors, on that? We've got a mover and a second, all four. Against carried, thank you very much. Any displays of interest, councillors, members? No, can I move and seconder? Councillor Fry, Councillor McKibben, all four. Against carried, thank you. First day, Chairman's report. Confidential. We'll go into we'll move into management reports, item 10. Okay, councillors. Oh, sorry. Long-term financial plan update. Item 1. Can I remove the second, please? Councillor McKibben. Councillor Reid, the second. Commentary members. Councillor Reynolds. I'll go through.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking at the long-term financial plan, it's a little concerning that looking out we potentially have losses. I know looking into a crystal ball 10 years out is very, very difficult to even come close, particularly with government funding and council funding. One would assume if it looks as though we are going to be heading towards losses, that we might approach our councils about extra funding, etc. So, again, we may not get acceptance, but I'm assuming that's a way that we could potentially cover a deficit.
In a second, Councillor. Finish.
So that's the first question. The second question is a 4-year operational plan. I assume we're going to develop one of those next, so to the next council meeting, or is this both?
Mr. Chair.
if I can answer the second question first. So, so the next meeting will have the draft next year's 1-year financial budget. The new 4-year budget won't be prepared until the new council. So that will be in the next council's term.
That will be one of the first parts of the new council to
We'll still have a budget for next financial year, though. So
yes, very shortly.
New council won't sit till probably October.
Okay. That will go to the April council meeting as a draft. So that's, and then it'll go on exhibition, etc. Mr. Chairman, can I just add that?
Yes.
So that budget will very, other than the incidental changes, will very closely reflect the 10-year plan you'd expect. And if I can address the second question, so I absolutely agree that 10 years out is almost impossible on a straight line type approach. However, the variables as you get further out are the WACC grant from DPI. And as I said in here, it's based on basically being flat for the next period of time. So if it goes backwards, then that will have big implications. If it actually improves a little bit, which typically would be the case, then that will immediately impact on that. The other thing is that the 10-year plan doesn't yet factor in any possible profit, if we call it that, from the likes of the aerial program. And that's because today, this year, we haven't quite got that resolved, but we're rapidly working along towards making that balance from the next budget. So there's some positive more so than negatives at this stage, I think.
One
Yes,
further before I go to my colleagues, with regard to remuneration for councillors, which we put on the agenda to try and look at. So there is some flexibility still that if we agree to say go from $2,000 to $4,000 remuneration as an example, I'm not saying we will or won't. There is that flexibility when we do the full-year plan or the next year operational plan, which will be 1st of July. So there's that flexibility still.
Mr. Chairman, firstly, I do recall that was an issue still on the table, and the time to address that, and I'll have that taken into account, is at the April meeting. So remember.
Okay, sure.
And if I could just add too, is that all members would be aware that we have had, sort of, I guess, approaches as far as potential other work with the local land services and things like that. Until they're bedded down better in the future, that could be a revenue source moving forward as well. Was that just Councillor Keenan was next, and I'll follow up.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a problem with the way this is set out. I would like to see the recommendation at the beginning of each article. So you asked for a mover and seconder, and we're going to flip down to the end of the item to find out what it is.
Could I ask, have you got a question in relation to this, or is it just in relation to the structure of each of the recommendations where they appear?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's no question of this. We'll take that on notice that we'll look at doing that in the future. Our council does do that, but it's in relation to this we're talking about, the long-term financial. Have you got any questions in relation to that?
Well, no.
Okay, Councillor Member McKibben.
Look, thank you, Matthew. Mr. Chairman, I think quite a few of the issues have been discussed already. I mean, when I read this and looked at the 10-year program, I noted that there wasn't any increase in what funding. I thought that was being particularly conservative. I know that we may, as you've said, get a revenue stream from managing other people's weed programs. Obviously, that still hasn't crystallised. So we can probably say there's a 50% chance. I'm hoping it's more, but let's put it realistically at 50%. No more at this stage until something really crystallises. But I thought on the funding side that even with governments being, I think in the next few years, going to be under extreme circumstances because of the amount of money that's been spent with COVID, etc., stimulating the economy, that if we're proven to be a successful weed authority, that we're more likely, hopefully, to get money where others may not. So I think best thing to do is to even make sure that our performance improves much further. And we'll go to that when we get labour, on the re-inspections, try and maybe concentrating more on that for a while to show that our performance is good. And if we can show that we have the runs on the board, we're more likely to get a greater share of WACC funding or funding from other sources even. And that's even with the 50-50 I was talking about through OS. So I thought the 10-year projection was realistic. I think correct me, I think it was only a $7,000 deficit, wasn't it, in year 10, sorry. So it's not huge.
I think
it's minor compared to what some of our councils may incur over that period.
Member McKibben, you are right, and I think the work of all the members and our staff have put us in a very good position, and at least a good chance of gaining grants and funding by doing a good job. So you're 100% right. And
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following what Councillor Gibbons has said and what you mentioned through you to the Christian General Manager is, I mean, I'm happy with a flat WACC as it's presented. But do you feel you have enough time to trace grants and look for grants, or do you have to delegate that to a staff person or possibly an outside consultant. But where do you believe we are with chasing grants? I know you've got a job to do, and that's often seen as an extra duty or peripheral, but I'm leaning towards seeing it is a core part of your duties. I don't know how to fit it in, but that's the question: is do you feel you've got enough time to chase grants?
Mr. Chairman, it may be something we ought to talk about a little bit more, maybe at the April workshop, in relation to the opportunities for business development, because my view, quite honestly, is that there are no capital grants generally available for our organisation. And like with the recent example where Bathurst Council has, which you've seen in the papers, got $50,000, by hook or by crook towards the WE program. I think that's the type of way that we will get more resources. I know that Oberon was pursuing that same direction, but didn't manage to get it over the line. Things like some of the LLS projects, which I mentioned, I think a couple of meetings ago, where we're doing some extra work with them to do with, I think it's living on the edge, to do with the national parks type areas. And what we're doing is not actually spending any of our money, but they have a grant, so they're doing work and we're going to help them incidentally as their project develops, but we will actually get some financial benefit from it by nominally selling chemicals to the landholders, and LLS will pay us for chemicals type approach.
It's all like a partnership.
I think the reality is somewhere along the line it might turn up, but the amount of effort that goes into applying for capital grants and the chance of getting them for us is very thin, and they don't actually help our budget position or our 10-year plan, because basically all they're saying is go and do some more work, find some resources to do the work, and it's almost, or can be, self-defeating. So
what's worse, you might get ones. Whatever you make, you've got to match. Matching to have something they're useless.
Leslie, was that your comment?
Oh, no, sorry, I was about the funds coming from councils. Just remind me, is the funds we get just a percentage of the individual constituent council's budget, or is it a percentage of population? As population slowly increases, we might get an extra amount of money, or is it just a completely fixed amount?
So I eventually found the formula sometime after I got here. There's a lovely formula which actually is quite appealing. It basically uses what is now old information, but it was talking about a formula that involves the land terrain, an assessment by the Department of Agriculture as to the level of weed infestation. The disability allowance is related to terrain. So if you've got weeds growing on hillsides, they cost more to control or deal with. And there is another factor which isn't coming to my mind at this moment. So what that did
Number
was...
of landholders, the number of landholders.
Yeah, that's right. So the number of landholders, and what they do, they brought it all together and said, therefore, you've got a council area of so big, so much of it is steep, weed infested, etc., and therefore out of the total pool which the council was looking for at the time, that will mean Lithgow, whatever it is, Bathurst, Blaney and Oberon, and that changed.
I think you'll
10
find
years ago we did that.
2008 or 9, Bathurst took a higher percentage, and it took a little bit off everyone else. So the formula, if you were to do it, isn't quite to that figure, because it was agreed, I think it was 8 or 9, it was over 10 years ago, and our council, it was only a couple of percentages higher. It just moved a little bit. I think it was a little bit off Oberon and a little bit off Blaney, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think Lithgow might have had a fraction higher too.
So it means the proportion is fixed, is the answer to the question.
So that explains the breakdown,
Yes.
that each individual council will pay of the whole.
Yes.
But how does the total amount change?
So the total amount is based on the historical amount agreed at the time of roughly 10 years ago or more. And it's increased by the rate peak. And that's That's the rule. So if the rate peg is low, we don't get much more. If the rate peg's high, we do get more.
That's great. And another question on page. I'm trying to, anyway, dot point 5, we're talking about a new vehicle we typically purchase each year. That's fair enough. You've got to keep your stock up. Do we have a bulk buying agreement with some bigger player?
Mr. Chairman, we have access to the same buying arrangements as all of the councils.
Joint organisation.
Yeah.
So despite the fact that the council is not part of the joint organisation. Yeah.
Well, sorry,
we all want to know that.
We get it at the heavily discounted government price.
Okay, thank you.
So, Kevin?
Sorry, David, I just want to say that I thought the other thing I think is that if we start to have improved seasons, and I think we've seen it this year, chemical sales have gone up quite considerably, that may continue. The other thing I think we should be pushing, because I've heard it quite a lot asked lately. I know some councils are probably pushing a little more than others, and maybe we should be doing is for people when they purchase a property to be able to get a certificate from a council to say whether that property has a weed notice on it, weed notice, direction, a penalty notice. I know that some councils do that, and that obviously is an earner for us because we get some fees for that. I think it's in the, I've said it in the board papers here, but I think that's important for purchases.
Mr. Chairman, so that the mechanism is in place for us, and we do issue certificates saying whether or not those things.
If we're requested by the council.
That's right. So the issue we're still working on, and we've taken a couple of little extra steps forward recently, is working with the councils, and I have to still get to the general managers at this point, to make sure that that conduit is there so that we can actually have, let's just say, more people actually coming to us and asking if it's not possible for the council to require it.
Yep, and Kevin?
So I just want to float this in, it may, it's probably more relevant later, but while I'm thinking about it, ask it. And please cut me down. So is it really relevant if someone is in, and I don't know what other councils call, we have an area called the Town Improvement Fund area, which is basically the Oban Township. And then I suppose it's a bit like race, and you have the people who actually live in the villages. The question is, if someone's buying a house in Oban, or in Bathurst, or in Blaney, or in Lithgow, is it so? I know we do have notices on people in those towns, but is it as relevant to if they're buying 200, 300, 400, 500 hectares outside those areas? Or is it as relevant if they're actually buying a small house in the villages? Now, I know we have weed problems in the villages, I'm not saying we don't. But with these notices, if we're going to get these searches, I think we may have to tailor it a bit, because if you ask everyone in Bathurst, for instance, we're looking at 40,000 population or whatever, to actually every purchaser to get a declaration that they don't have weeds on a house property to buy, I think it gets to a little ridiculous stage. So I'm just wondering if if in the workshop in April, we might put this on the agenda just to consider what we do with this, whether we should be pushing councils for all properties. And Chief Biosecurity Officer, appreciate your views on this. Or whether we should be doing it, because I don't think if someone's buying a house in Hope Street here, and they have to get a declaration that the property's free of weeds, I think that's a little bit ridiculous. So if it's in Methven Street, Lithgow, or it's in Carcourse, well, I know there's a couple of properties in Carcourse Street, Blaney, but you know what I mean.
I think they're based on zoning, based on zoning.
We can still charge them.
Well, we could, but you know what I mean? It's got to be realistic, I think, yeah. So I don't know if we thought about that through, but I think we may have to put a few parameters around it.
And the other thing too, our council asked a question on Wednesday night. We've gone to portal with our applications, so everything's got to go online when a person puts in the application. So I said, have we got room to move on it if we need to add stuff? And we have got a degree of flexibility,
Anyway,
which is good.
Maybe a subject for the workshop, to put some
Yeah.
realistic parameters. I know what you, Dave, what do you think, Bruce? I mean, I think, so, you know, I think we're going to be a bit reasonable on this.
Well, there's enough pressure on the household. People
I
buying.
know, I don't want to put more pressure on someone buying a house and perhaps go buying your own one. I think we're going to be a bit realistic.
I think on the point.
I know we do have problems in those towns, but we, you know, we have to be, David, what do you think?
Well, it's buyer beware.
It is, but
85 versus farmland, isn't it? 85.
But I was just going to suggest potentially outside the 50 zone.
that's what I was,
Similar to our
well,
roadside front.
yes, I tend to think some rule like that would be good.
Well, we'll find it in some way in our working party, just have at least a
What do you think?
discussion to come with some notes. Yeah, please.
We can't be out there.
Yeah, councillors, we'll get back on track. I'll give you a bit of flexibility there.
So, sorry, it might have to be 60 zones, because some of the roads are about 60.
Members, anything more about item one? It's got to be.
Sorry, I was gone.
It's
We
all
have
right.
dealt with
No,
some
it's
issues we might have dealt with before, but.
So any more? No? We've got a recommendation. I move to second, all four. Against carried. Thank you very much. Item two, statement investments as of January 31st, 2021. General Manager, just want to make a correction there.
Mr Chairman, just if you're looking in the third paragraph position, there's a typo error in there where I referred to funds on notice in mid-January. Obviously, this is at the end of January, it was meant to be mid-February.
Everyone all right with that?
That's something to amend.
Yep. That was all right. Member
On a
Keegan, yep. So move to second on that. Councillor Ring, Councillor Fry, any commentary? Councillor Member Reynolds.
Just one, again, it's my usual one, and I've been
You're
looking at my council business papers on our sort of like check account or our operating account, whether we could have another line, just, and again, I know it will change after the 31st of January, but just the total funds, because like, as the General Manager has said, if we move 200,000 into our check account, we may have 150,000 left at the end of February, but we think, oh yeah, we've only got 1.2 million. So I'm just wondering if we could have one more line. I know it's not investments, but as in we just have total, as in cash on hand, I suppose you could say, plus investments. It's just an extra line in the report at the end of each month, which you should have.
That should be what?
There's no reason why not.
Yeah.
So I just like that one extra line, particularly as it was highlighted in this paper that 200,000 may be moved across to our everyday account.
Fair comment.
Besides that, as in, well, the other one question is, why are we, given that we're not quite at the third quarter, but at least at the halfway mark, we're at least $200,000+ in front of 12 months ago. Is that because we're just not spending enough of the money, or are there other reasons? We've got some grant funding that's built up our cash reserves, or why through to the General Manager?
Mr Chairman, apart from the fact we're excellent money managers, there are both of the reasons that Member Reynolds mentioned are the cause. So we're basically $100,000 behind in expenditure, as you see in the QBRS. We've got the 50,000 hanging around from LNS, which is still hasn't been spent yet. It will be by the end of the year, fingers crossed. And it probably wasn't in at this point, but this will be distorted yet again in the next report of the QBRS when we see the 50,000 from Bathurst that comes in before we spend it. Now, actually by the next quarter will be in and out, so it'll be neutralised. But and then of course the rest of it was the fact that we had a higher surplus at the end of last year. So and the other item is we're still probably the 20,000 on the ICT improvement for STEM. So when you add all of that up, we're in a strong position, but there's a lot of money that will be gone in due course.
Other question, members? Recommendations there, all four. Against carried, thank you very much. Item 3, quarter budget review statement number 2 for 2020-21 financial year. We have a recommendation there. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Fry, Councillor Ring, Member Ring, sorry. Any questions, members? Member Reynolds?
So the projection, if we go across to the attachment, is at this stage a projection of $157,210 that we have as a profit or result before capital items.
Yep.
Given the general manager may be able to update us here on how close we are to employing other people, given that January again, we'd have at least one staff member less than prior. So I'm just wondering, sort of, are we heading towards an annual surplus of without, and there was weed spraying as well, so there's rates on weed spraying that we've done after December 31st or invoiced after December 31st, but can we get a projection of a rough estimate of, are we heading for a surplus of 100,000 at the end of the year, 50,000, or the original $707?
Jim, can you give the?
In the fourth last line is the projected end of year. So at this moment, and we're actually projecting an additional 10,000 surplus, and that's purely based on the extra money we've had from penalties and extra things like that. At this stage, we hope to be fully resourced, and in fact, with the extra resourcing starting from Monday over the next week or two, so that we've got people in there coming on board. And then part of the excess here, of course, which you've identified, is that we slipped a little bit behind with some of the roadside stuff as at the end of the quarter. After we know what happens with the next aerial program, I'd be in a much better position to tell you, which will actually be the next quarter in April. But it won't be 100,000 and it won't be 150,000, I can assure you.
Kevin.
Sorry, just to clarify, so we have made a selection in relation to replacement by security.
So we're
officer.
at this very
And
moment,
we're looking at a temporary additional resource to run our aerial program, act as a troubleshooter.
at this very moment, we've offered appointment and have accepted to the assistant person, the program assistant, support person, and we're almost, like within, well, I didn't have the meeting I've been today, we're almost at the point of offering the other one, the biosecurity officer. So it's imminent. And yeah, that's all I can say really.
So Mr. Jean, so this all is finalised, say next week or two, between next meeting, can you please advise all the members, please?
Maybe I should just add that it's relevant to this context. I did mention in the report, there's actually two things that flow with this. So when the council provided the extra last quarter, 66,000 to do some additional roadside works, which we may be contracting, and catch us up on our backlog, if you want to call it that. I did point out at the time, and I'm sure the council agreed, that it might actually take place over 12 months, that extra 66,000. So it was like in this first half of this year and the first half of the next year. And the other side of it was, which I mentioned in here, is we have to be very careful that we do actually spend the right money on the right programs. But there is a mechanism in the WAP program that if for some reason, like you don't have an officer for 6 months or something, that you can actually roll across, let's call it the work and the funding that relate to that period of time simply into the next year. So the DPI have that mechanism there. We hang on to the money, but we account for it in the next year. So I'm not proposing that, I'm just sort of letting you know that if we get stuck, that's what happens, we don't lose it.
One follow on then with regard to the aerial spraying, as I think we made in the QBRS about $10,000. We received 10,000 more in revenue than we did in expenditure for aerial spraying. For this autumn spraying program with both blackberries and serrated tussock, we're not putting the price up. We're going to review the next year's.
Well, we've got the pricing now, and we adjusted right at the last minute before the other program, following our discussions. We're fairly close to being guaranteed of covering all of our costs with some contingency. That 10,000 there is a little bit misleading, but there's no other way of accounting for it at the current time, simply because we aren't actually able to charge out every element of the work that goes into the aerial program in this current financial year. Next year, with the auditors' agreement, we'll make a couple of adjustments to ledgers and things so that we can actually fully charge it And if that was the case, it would have been just break even or a tiny bit better. So it isn't 10,000, but it is the household. And then next budget, I'll come back with an increased price as necessary to do what the council's already decided.
Member McKibben.
Thank you. I know we talk about that, but look, I'll deal with the issue under the aerial program. I think that's easy.
Okay. Members, nothing else? We have a recommendation there, all four?
Aye.
Thank you, Carrie, thank you. Item 4, delivery program, half-year progress report. We have a recommendation there, can I have a move in a second, please? Councillor Reynolds, Councillor McKibben, any commentary, councillors? Member McKibben?
Thank you. The only thing I noted is part way down page 11, I think it is, point D. I noticed our hit rates somewhere about 40%, which is a drop from where we were in our, of the 698 properties found, there were 233 that were considered high risk. So that's about a third. We were around 50%. I think we all should be trying to up that a bit. I think that should be aimed. So I think we need to, I know we looked at it at the last workshop, as to how to increase that hit rate. And maybe, I mean, the general manager knows I took a map away and I've just gone to people and said where about areas, but not a map showing this subject to privacy, just to get some ideas from some people. And I maybe ask if other members want to do something like that, because we do need to get our hit rate up, and some of these properties are hidden, as we all know. As we talked about, one over the hill, I think is how we expressed it. So I just raise that as to, you know, we don't want to be using unnecessary resources on properties that are relatively common.
So you think we're missing these properties? We're not getting to them on a, I thought we were getting there every 3.
Well, hit rates come down a little bit.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, so firstly, the observation is correct, and that is that our, what I refer to sometimes as the success rate, because we get bad stuff that's successful, as long as it's not a re-inspection. So it has dropped in recent times, and that's simply a fact. Remember at the last workshop, we discussed a number of options, as you mentioned, and I've still got them in my pile here to do, but an important part of that also involves having our additional resource when they're not doing the aerial, etc., to actually put some concerted effort into finding those places. So I suppose all I'd highlight, none of that has been lost. And the exercise that Member McKibben's doing will be a really good test as well as to, so when we go out and inspect the areas that his local community have marked, you know, to him as going on the map, that would be really helpful. And if they all end up being 1s and 2s, then we need to scratch our heads. But so I think the other thing is just to remember, there's lots of time lags in this business, and having not, well, we've run the aerial program we didn't plan on running, we've had a staff member retire, etc. So all of that has really pushed all of that out, not changing that statistic, but I mean, we haven't been able to sort of really try and rectify things yet. So we're now getting very close.
And I think we really, the other thing I think we all should be doing is trying to, you know, even further re-engage with our community groups and encouraging landholders, etc. If they've got a bad neighbour, come forward even anonymously to tell the police or to tell someone what the issue is. I know we reinforced that the other night at a meeting. I don't know if anything's come out of it. I know when we had the Bathurst New South Wales farmers, there was quite a few people came forward. You did Bathurst too. You did Bathurst too, yeah. So those meetings seem quite good in that it encourages people. But again, New South Wales farmers meetings, we only get a small element of farmers come forward. So we have to sort of, I don't even know if it's worth you know, we have St Oberon, we have the Bury Community Association, the Black Springs Community Association, the O'Connell Association, we have to get down to those levels to try and, you know, it doesn't have to be a formal presentation, but even us as council make a bit of a presentation there to say, you know, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, we really need your help. Peter and Neil, what we did the other night at the bench shift here, please come forward here with the details. Because the more sort of organisations we can lock into and encourage people to come forward, because the land, as landholders know who the bad people are, they have a better idea, you know, they've got the back fence that's over the hill that fronts onto X, Y, Z, and they know they've got rid of it.
Generally, just so first bit of feedback is that all that information we came directly or indirectly from the Farmers Federation was actually good information.
Yeah.
You know, there actually were problems in those areas that need to be attended to. I have, and I know this happens with other people, I have personally been approached by a couple of locals up my way who worked out what I'm doing now. And they came forward and rhymed off some very long lists of problems all the way up through Ginkin and everywhere else. And mind you, a couple of them, Tony had already beaten me too, which I thought was actually really good. So he'd already been on the board and found them. But I suppose what I would say is the good landholders, without trying to define who they are, the ones that care about their land holding are actually really good reporters in the sense of the quality of their report. The other group we get are the individuals who visit now and again, and they don't know what weeds are, but they're going to complain about their next door neighbour regardless. So we get some very wasteful reports, and that tends to be in urban areas, basically.
The other thing I note that certainly the Chief Biosecurity Office is considering in some of the, and we talked about it before, in some of these bad to get to areas, we may need to use the helicopter to identify. And at some stage, we've got to make a decision when that day is, and be able to identify those valleys or areas that we're going to attack and do it in a concerted effort. And I know that the Chief Biosecurity Officer said to me, sometimes it's hard to get GPS coordinates, a helicopter that can move so fast. Doesn't stay stable enough to be able to do it with the iPads are correct.
Catch up.
Yes, but so we've probably got to work on, we're going to have to put a statement in the sand at some stage, say, right, we've got enough information out, we think it's worth getting a helicopter for a day.
Yes, we're not there yet.
No, we're not there yet, but you maybe got to come back to us when you think we're there.
Yeah.
And say, okay, and maybe we've got to allocate a budget item for that coming up the next year or whatever.
A few points, Mr. Chair. One of them, Member McKibben's helicopters. I recently engaged a spraying contractor to spray a Crown Reserve that I set up the management group for. And we got the contractor in on the ground, and he came back to me. This is on the Belobula River. He said there was one little area that I just could not get into. He said just blackberry and overhang and just down to the river. He said, well, next year, hopefully I can come back and some of the blackberries I've hit, sprayed to get into all of this centre area. But it's too small for a helicopter, and also the trees, you probably couldn't get a helicopter in there anyway. My main comments were, one, whether we've looked at succession planning at all, given we lost a staff member to retirement, whether we should be looking a little further out again, and maybe on an annual basis when the GM does the staff review with each of the staff members, you know, what's your intention for the next 12 months, and see if we can get an indication so we may be able to fill the place earlier if, and again, the person may not divulge, so they're right to or not to divulge. But just a little bit of looking at succession planning, if at all possible, right up through to the general manager, who, you know, might walk out on the street, bus ploughing. Not that I want to give it about general manager, but you know, as in, to make sure that there's someone else that can do everyone's job. I think is the where possible. So do the chief biosecurity officer's job, etc. So that we can cover if there is a catastrophe of some sort. God forbid that it ever happens to any of us. But the other question or comment is, and we're asking landholders to report. And I've had one case, and I won't name it because we're in open council. where a number of landowners have reported to me an individual, it's not a huge block, but a large amount of blackberries. It's a very visible block, and we've been going a couple of years now, and we don't seem to be getting anywhere, and I keep getting the constant complaints back, you're not doing anything. And it's very hard as a member to go, we're trying, but I can't tell you anything, to do something on that particular block. That's the type of frustration that we get on the other side. I had another landholder who said, over the hill there, I reported to you a couple of years ago, and I did report it to the county council. I said, I don't know what's happened there, whether we're taking action or not against that individual. But that's the challenge on the other side, that people do report things to you as a member, and then they say you're not doing anything. So, and it's not potentially our fault if we're not doing something, though I will ask about that landholder in close council. But that's the challenge on the other side, that part of the visibility is maybe not, because of the slowness of follow-up, and also if you have recalcitrant landholders, as I noticed that the GM has mentioned in these reports, that's going to be a challenge in actually getting them to action. But the landholders, the neighbouring landholders who are being reinvested, don't see that we're doing anything. That's the visibility of us doing something. So how we improve our reputation on those recalcitrant landholders is very hard to deal with, because we can't tell the public what we are or aren't doing with those individuals.
Sorry, a couple of issues that Member Reynolds has raised. When we had a look at confidential, the 9.1 in particular, I was going to make some comments in relation to that. Especially now that we have seasonal conditions that are favourable to spraying.
Just comment, have we had any luck, when we tried as far as the satellite, the imaging, have we ever found out who got that and what's happening there?
I have tried. I have just the federal government people that deal with grants won't talk to you unless you are a grant applicant. They won't tell you anything.
Well, we're an applicant, but we failed.
That's right.
Well, actually,
I think yeah, that's right. Oberon was, yeah.
so maybe
Yeah, we can see if we can find it, because that could be part, if we have trouble even the helicopters, the imaging, as we said, the technology's there. And I was actually going to say, just a comment, saying we're talking about weeds, I got approached in a news agency by a lady to have a sent to the Chief Biosecurity Officer that Mick Willett, his efforts, and they were a young couple on a farm, they've been there 4 or 5 years, his efforts, and they've just got in and done the blackberries and just about to do the tussocks. But yeah, the support from the staff, from a new person on the land, and they're keen to learn, and Mick has been very, very good. So I wanted to say that in front of all the members. It's good to get that feedback from a member of the public. Members, with any other comments about item 4? Member Reynolds.
One on the number 2, I think it is, it's about the 5th tick down, the general security or general biosecurity direction.
Yep.
To Forestry Corporation in this case, but have we moved to any other biosecurity directions with government agencies, or where are we up to with, again, I think the forestry one came to a resolution, but particularly with the rail, can the general manager give us any update on where we're up to with the rail line control?
Mr. Chairman, in relation just with this forestry one, so that was a general biosecurity direction which applies equally to forestry and all of the constituent councils. So Blaney, Lithgow, Oberon and Bathurst, all, it applies to them as well. Of course, the constituent councils, they already had an arrangement in place through our roadside program, etc. So really it was not an issue. So since that direction was issued, forestry, who had been working cooperatively anyway, but they just jumped a little bit higher, and they've now actually signed up both to the MOU and the annual roadside weed control program, and they're now part of the council program going forward. This year, it was a little bit late to actually add it all into the program, but they're actually working to the roads that we put in there, and we'll be organising for more next year. But in addition to the roads, they actually up their overall program quite a lot. And it's still difficult to know exactly where they're working sometimes because the size and scale of some of their operations, but we're putting a lot more effort into understanding that. With the railway, so the afternoon that I issued those biosecurity directions on the railways, which was to the Secretary of New South Wales Transport, I got a phone call very quickly. And it was from one of their senior directors of country regional network contracts or whatever. And he wanted to reassure me that he did understand what the directions meant, that he did know that they included executive liabilities if they failed to comply with them. And at that point, he wanted to, he also told me that they are committed to meeting their biosecurity directions, and muttered something about, well, the government made the rules, so how can we not comply with them? And then he also said, and Transport for New South Wales is being completely restructured at the moment. So we're not sure who'll be responsible next week. Now, we haven't been advised since. However, the fellow who's the chief engineer at Newcastle gave me a call, which is Mike Mills, and he is carrying forward on that issue until such time as we know what is or isn't happening. It may well be him. So since then, we've had correspondence from John Holland. That was about a day later. So obviously some people started moving. And they have now said that in response to our 4 directions, which, as you know, we didn't stop it just where the current weed control notices applied, which was Lithgow to Bathurst. We just took them further all the way to Milthorpe. And we gave them 4 months to do it, which means at the end of May, which would be the end of the Macquarie season for sure, gives us time to inspect them soon after. In those directions, we've also required that they facilitate our on-rail inspections rather than just hoping that they will do it. So that is part of the direction. So if they don't arrange it when we want it, then that's another executive liability of some sort, or at least a penalty. Anyway, I think what I'm saying is we did shake them up a fair bit. They assure me, but I don't believe it till I see it. They assure me that the work is being scheduled now, and that they're going to, the first stage will be from Lithgow to Orange, and that's starting soon, allegedly. And then they're going to carry on all the way to Dubbo based on what we initiated. So there's our regional, that's a regional sort of feathering our cap if that happens. They've also just completed 3 weeks of work, again, I'm told, in response to weed control notices on the Devondrel line from Carcoar to was around the Limestone Creek area. I believe, I don't know if any of our officers have had time to check it yet, but we'll check them in the near future, won't we? See.
Yeah, sorry, we've diagnosed a few sections along there that have been.
Haven't got numbers yet.
Mr. Chairman, they haven't told us about any exclusion, so that will be very interesting if that's the case. By the way, this was targeting blackberries, which of course are the most obvious. And so the 2 missing bits in the railway network at the moment are actually from Blaney Carcoar and from Turrinar to Oberon, which at least up the Oberon end isn't too bad. Some of the other areas I honestly can't be sure. So we'll definitely have them in the program for the next year, but let's see what happens.
So, as a supplementary, Mr. Chair, to congratulate the General Manager for progressing this matter. I think it's an important matter, and I did notice in my travel down here today that yes, in Blaney town itself, there is on the Blaney to Dorromongol line a large number of factories in the township of Blaney. And again, I've actually came down along the line today to Bathurst as much as I could through Newbridge. And I noticed from Newbridge down to about Perthville, it's not too bad, but from Perthville in again, a lot of blackberries in the better country, along the river, sort of flat country. The other supplementary question with regard to forestry, and I have been approached by Newcrest Mining about this matter, is in the forests around in our part of the world as opposed to the Bond council area, but are you getting any traction with, we've sprayed the roadsides, but just over the fence, quite large blackberry infestations in that state forest area, but on both sides of the road. That's, I wonder if the general manager has got anywhere there.
So, Mr. Chairman, my understanding at the moment is that we looked at those properties as well, and because the road was so atrocious, we felt it was prudent to get the roadside under control first, and then serve the notices on the forestry people, which means they won't be done immediately, but they'll be done in this next period of time. Thank you. Pretty sure that's right. I'm not seeing anybody nodding the other way.
Member McKibben, did you?
Oh, no, I will, I'll try and catch the train down to Lithgow again and back and see if anything's been done. It's a very good way of viewing whether anything's been done. You catch it one side one way, and one side the other, coming back.
I wouldn't do it this week, though. I don't think it's quite that far.
It's called Port Out, starboard zone.
So councillors, we have a recommendation there, all four. Again, thank you very much. Item 5, County Council meeting schedule for 2021. Recommendation there, Government Mover, seconder. Councillor Kingham, Councillor Ream. Anything, members? No? All four? Against carried, thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, can I just quickly add, at this stage, it looks like we might be in the Kelso chamber next time. And we'll confirm that when the next lot of papers come out. If anything happens, we can have up to 19 people there, but we can't really get the public in, which is not a big deal, but so we'll have the workshop in the next meeting there if we can.
I'll tell them not to come.
You're locked out.
I assume we don't have any video. Audio recording.
Mr. Chairman, no, we'll have a facility the same as that. So courtesy of that.
It's going to say, it better come back. Councillor Fry moved, we chasing you. Okay, item 6, aerial weed treatment service review. We have a recommendation there, councillors. Can I move second, Councillor Reynolds, Councillor McKibben. Anything, members? Member McKibben.
Look, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I personally feel this is a very important program, as I've said before. I think it gets us a lot of kudos from across the across our Macquarie area, and I think that having 40 landholders and however many hectares, 1,500 hectares or whatever, actually sprayed is well worth the effort, and as long as we're cost neutral. I know that when we bring on additional resources, as discussed earlier in the meeting, at least that additional one of the additional resources, not the weed officer so much, will be devoted to looking after and trying to running this program once it's been identified by the appropriate weed officers that certain properties are probably willing to go into this. I think the result's good. I think we should be encouraging as many people as we can to go into the autumn spraying with blackberries or tussock. I suppose one of the things at some stage we should do is try and see, get a costing comparison with a commercial operator outside the one that we engage to see, how cost competitive we are. The great thing I think is that we do, and as we can recover from this, is do all the organisational benefit, which I think has been said this before. A lot of small properties in particular are getting large. We just never get round to it. That's what I've said before. But we probably have to just look at, from a costing perspective, how we're placed. I would have thought the helicopter side would probably is, because of economies of scale, we'd be competitive. And after we add all our admin costs, etc., I mean, the operators may not add that, but they probably won't get the economies of scale either, because they won't be organising the number of people we do. But as I said, I think it's well worth it. I think what's shown here, and if we put this additional resource on to assist us with organising this, it's good. Have we any idea how many people will like to go into the audit program at this stage? We have any figures?
Not exactly at this stage, we're still
A ballpark figure, would we say?
As many as the sprinkler, 40.
We haven't got that many committed yet.
There's not that many.
There are, I think.
Interested?
Yeah, so far there's been at least 10 to 15 contracts handed to me, ready for deposit taking. I know that at least 20 just for Mick Willett, he's got to see them and they're keen and ready to sign up. And that's just for one officer, so.
What about Tony? You should have a few.
On average, yeah, so his Ball Ridge area has, yeah, it keeps going, it just keeps growing.
So we could have 60,
There's the potential there.
potential for 60 to 80.
440, 60.
440, let's say 40 to 60.
But Mr. Chairman, of course, the key to this is when you get the contract signed, you know you've got them.
That's it.
But I was just going to make the comment in relation to price, which as we've talked about what we're doing before, but at this stage, we can't be overcharging too dramatically because we aren't putting very many people off when we raise it slightly, including that deposit arrangement. So it must be, at least in terms of value for money, most people are obviously seeing it worthwhile.
Well, yes, Jim, comment I get all the time is, I wouldn't go around to this in this upper Macquarie River. They just wouldn't get round to it. And it's the economies, you know, all right, I've only got 100 hectares to do, or 50 hectares or whatever. But when you consolidate it, it means it's a better price than I can get.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask whether or not considerations been given to using drones for spraying, particularly in areas where none of the drones are saying chocolate could get. The technology is advancing. I've looked at a couple of companies, particularly in street areas or areas that are difficult to call helicopters. Have we considered their use in the future?
Mr. Chairman, I, for example, went to a demonstration. Member Fry was there as well at the university probably a year or more ago, just looking at some of the different drone technology we could use. However, in the next week or so, on Monday, we've actually got a real trial going on using a contractor who does, and he's going to do some spraying on a very difficult area, just to show us what can happen, how it can be done. But if it's done by drones, I think my understanding would be it would be economical for an individual property owner to arrange it themselves. But that doesn't rule out the fact that we might do it. And there are a couple of sites, particularly in Lithgow, where if all else fails, we might have to use drones to spray some roadside areas where you've got very steep embankments, accessible but very steep, and like there's just no way of doing it responsibly any other way. So definitely increasingly on our radar.
I think Councillor Ring's a very valid point. I mean, the large drone I said is a Yamaha with a helicopter thing with quite a reasonable tank on it, I think. The Phantom Force or something, obviously, don't have much capacity. But I'm just wondering, obviously it might be another issue for a workshop, is again, it might be up to the Upper Macquarie to start the ball rolling, to get a few people who helicopters are not suitable because there's too much canopy of trees, for instance. And it's too much danger for a helicopter pilot getting under the, obviously, to maybe start the ball rolling and organise these in a few difficult areas to have a field day, show people what can be done. Again, I sort of get the feeling a lot of landholders just won't get there unless we push the barrow. Obviously, the liability issues are a lot less with a drone if it goes down and could kill someone. And we're engaged a contractor in any event. But I just think we may be, and when we have this additional temporary resource on, it may be worth investigating this, as Member Bean has said, to look at it and have a field day.
Mr. Chair, yeah, I support the continuation of the helicopter or aerial spraying because you could use fixed as well. The one challenge that I highlighted last year was to make sure that we get towards break even, and I think the general manager is working towards a process, and also not taking away from resources our inspectors. So again, having someone that may be dedicated purely to the aerial, so if it's a very dry year, that person doesn't get much work. If it's a wet year, that person gets a lot of work. We also get far more landholders on. Feedback I get again, particularly from with regard to the small landholders, is yes, as in they would get around to it themselves, and the economies of scale of coming into an area, maybe doing 3 or 4 properties with a helicopter, whereas it's just not economical to get someone in to do it all. They just can't get motivated to organise and actually get the ground covered. So there are a lot of benefits, as far as I understand, and I think it's in this business paper, but I've also been told separately that we're the only weed authority that actually organises aerial campaigns to control. And from what I've heard through New South Wales farmers, there is a bit of envy out there that other areas of the state would love to sort of see something like this, particularly along the tablelands to do. So again, as long as we can get it to a break even, so we're not impacting on our inspections, I think it's a very worthwhile program to continue. So we've just got to get it to that break even, and also resource wise have it so that we're not using our resources to run this program at the benefit of a few, let alone letting a lot of landholders not undertake weed control or enforcement of the Biosecurity Act. So I commend the GM again in progressing this and continuing the program.
Mr. Chairman, if there are a lot of surrounding council areas that are envious of us, maybe when we have this additional resource on, we could offer their services to make a small profit on being able to organise their programs so that we don't tie up our biosecurity office with this additional resource. If we had that time, could actually assist them to arrange it and we could charge for it using our sort of similar contracts, etc., etc. You know, I don't know if that's an avenue.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just say these are the sort of issues we want to bring back to the workshop,
Yeah,
because
I agree.
I think that whatever, I can't remember the expression Member Reynolds used, but the business opportunity, I think they have to relate to what we already do or do well, rather than left field things that we have to start up something completely different and hope for the best. So
This is within our ambit, though.
Yeah.
This is within our knitting, if I can put it that way. We're not looking it up.
I agree. But that'll be in the pile of ideas.
But we don't want to divert our biosecurity officers from their key thing, but if we get this additional resource on, even if we get this, rather than have this person 3 months or 4 months, we give them an extra 2 months, and that's justified because these other councils are paying for it. That's fine. And we might make a small, you know, it dissipates our overheads over a longer, you know, more work.
A question, Mr. GM. If we had 10,000 properties out there, what do you feel is the success rate of how many properties would be aware of it? Because this lady the other day made a comment to me about, you know, what I said earlier, and I said you realise and she had no idea of it. What do you think? I know it's a ballpark, but people are aware, but we have an error reach. But I know we're going to put information out and advertise it. But you know, a lot of people don't listen to radio, don't see a lot of things. You know, like should we have a goal of having an extra 10 people every year or something? Fair go. Sorry?
Mr. Chairman, I honestly couldn't guess, but I think it's true to say that the main way we get the message out to people is by the biosecurity inspectors in the field.
Yeah.
And of course, if they go to a property and the property's clean and then they're not going to be even mentioning the fact that we have an aerial program, but in every opportunity, without selling it and without in any way crossing over between being the enforcer and the service provider, they make the information available to people. I think that's where most of it comes from. And then they tell, and then typically they tell next door, who tells next door, who tells next door.
And all our field days and that, we've just got to keep pushing messages, because I'll ask people, and there's more people don't know about it, and we talk about the same ones come back. Like, do we have a goal that we want to get an extra 10 every time we do it? You know what I mean? Should we be setting ourselves some targets, finding other ways to get this information out?
Mr. Chairman, I think the problem here is, and this is me being a little bit negative, the problem here is that all of these things are really great ideas, but we've only got 7 or 8 people.
Yes.
And the ideas are ahead of us. and we're writing them all down and we're working towards it, but, you know.
Yep, just to comment,
Yeah.
Kevin, so Kevin.
Sorry, I think I raised a similar question with the general manager some time ago about putting it in the community newsletters for each of our respective councils. But I think I think the gist of the issue is until we get this additional resource on.
Yes. We
And
don't know
and we can't cope with it. Once we get the additional resource on, see how they've had them trained out, they understand the procedures and what we have to do, and they're actually all au fait with this, then it's probably the time to push this stronger. But we have to check the additional resource as the ability to do it, as the resource time, and then we look at the next steps. And it's a bit like the thing I mentioned about the drone. Get the resource on, check that they're running the aerial program fine, and they've got the time and resource to look at doing a drone field or something, then stop at the time.
Hopefully one final question. Do we have a Facebook page? As a Macquarie, my council only in the last week has put up the ad on our Facebook page, so we've promoted it throughout Blaneyshire. Whether we get many hits is another question, but do we have some form of social media outside of our web page to highlight activities like this that we can, at a very low cost, market ourselves?
Mr. Chairman, the short answer is no, but I also noticed that I use WhatsApp, which is a Facebook-owned piece of communication software. I've now been locked out of it, which was rather interesting. So they've obviously synced my phone as a government phone or something. I think what we've been talking about and working towards is actually making use of the 4 councils' Facebook pages and similar, because we just don't have the capability or capacity or whatever. So what we want to do is just keep improving. Some of the councils are really good and no one in particular is not good, but we just want to keep improving that communication and tapping into what they've got, because it's more likely that members of the public are looking at the local council's website than ours.
And you should be right notices doing lots of stuff.
Any other questions, members? Member Fry?
Page 19, the 3 program risks identified as financial, grant funding and legal liability. In terms of environmental risk, such as overspray or poisons getting into drinking water, catchments, or killing off-target species such as native grasses. Would environmental risk be picked up somewhere else in another template? But it obviously doesn't appear here.
It's in the enterprise risk register.
Yeah, that's right.
No, the enterprise risk register, which we can consider later on.
Mr. Chairman, this was just a very broad brush through where we've been talking about this before, and as David McKibben says, the environmental stuff. Remember we talked at length when we did the enterprise risk register, and it's still
picked up now.
it's in there. Yes, yeah. This wasn't trying to exclude anything; it was just giving a bit of an overview.
It's risk 6.
Yeah, it's environmental. Should I add that I did ask this Bathurst Regional Council, did we test for biocide chemical residues in our council drinking water convention catchment? And the engineer replied that no, we don't, because we're not required to. And since asked, could we do that test? But I haven't had a response at this stage.
Not much you have on that one? Yes. More of a comment. Members, any other questions, commentary? No, the recommendation in all 4. Against, carried, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm registered as being against. Sorry.
You're against? Okay. Item 7, weed biosecurity operations update. We have a recommendation there, councillors. Can I move and second that? Councillor Reynolds, Councillor Ring. Any commentary, councillors? If not, all 4. Oh,
sorry. With regard to properties, and we're really trying to focus on the re-inspection with the limited resources we've got in an aerial campaign. are we going to really try and push on those re-inspections rather than new inspections in the next 2 or 3 months?
Mr. Chairman, I think informally, yes, and we've also been talking internally. This is when we can't keep up, of focusing on the properties that are the 4s before the 3s, because they're obviously outrageous condition. I think it's the sensible thing to do, and I'd be happy if the council wanted to decide that that was what we should do.
So the question therefore, Mr. Chair, is should we modify the recommendation to focus on the recommendation? I do agree with Member Kingham, by the way, that you could have at the top. Council notes that we buy security update report. Maybe that something along the lines of that the upper Macquarie focus on re-inspections of class 4, case 4, whatever it is, weeds as a high priority. That
Is right.
and
Just
then,
acknowledge him. Yep.
and then class 3 re-inspections before we do many, as in there's always the opportunity that we might have to do 1 or 2, but new inspections, but we prioritise re-inspections above new inspections of class 4 and 3.
Do you want to, or general manager?
What do I want to do? I agree with the idea,
Okay.
and I've written down what I think we're talking about.
I'd second the recommendation. And I was going to probably raise it later, but I'm quite happy to raise it now. Noting that there are a whole lot of re-inspections due between January and March this year.
Yep.
A lot. So I would fully support Councillor Reynolds' recommendations that we that the re-inspections of those due for category 4 and for category 3 should take precedence over re-inspection, new inspection.
So the move in the second, if we had the dot point in, accept that, and there's a.
Sorry, Chief Biosecurity Officer. No,
You right?
I think I moved. Did I move?
Yes, you, yes.
yeah, I second it.
And of course, you figured you would, because I wasn't sure. So you'd be happy to do that as a dot point. Have you got that wording down? Would you like to put that again how you would like?
Well, I'm happy with, but I think what we said is that currently, due to the number of properties up for re-inspection between January and March 2021, that the emphasis be on re-inspections of category 4 and 3 rather than on new inspections for the next, 2 months or?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, you want to make comment, General Manager?
Mr. Chairman, in agreeing with the thrust of what we're talking about here, I think it's actually an important policy position for the council, and I think it should just stand, not just because of the 3 months.
All right, leave it 3 months.
And I think that, and I just had something like that council prioritise focus on re-inspections, firstly rated 4, then rated 3, rather than new inspections.
Yes.
At any point in time, because as has been said, if we are failing the re-inspections, then we're letting things go. The credibility of our system starts to flounder.
I agree with that. No problem that way.
I prefer not have the 3 and 4 in there, and be in more just the re-inspections, because the ones we are re-inspecting are the 3s and 4s. But we want to focus on those that are on the direction or first.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Take 3 or 4
So
out.
take it out, but talk about, and we focus on re-inspections as being a priority.
Yes,
And if there's one property with a 3 next to a property with a 4, we don't, it's ridiculous to come back later.
yeah, and I'd rather expect to run up the direction first.
Yep.
Thanks.
Well, I'm going to clarify, because I was about to move an amendment that the original motion was going to be put up to test the meeting.
Yep.
And I'm happy with that clarification.
Yeah, please.
So I feel that this is something more important just for our entire year, that always re-inspections take priority over inspections.
Your policy direction of this county council.
You could probably, is it, no, it's I mean, have you got an amendment to that
for any reason.
I think
No,
that's.
he's just waiting that to clarify
Could
before we
I
start.
potentially suggest as the mover that we do look at just the next 2 months, that the general manager brings us back an item for the next meeting, which actually restates a new policy direction, rather than spending a lot of time today. So we just give direction for the next couple of months to undertake re-inspections rather than inspections, but then we come back with a new policy to another later, possibly the next meeting of the county council policy. Then we've got a briefing paper to discuss the pros and cons.
But our indication of all the members here is that they would like that as a policy direction of this council. But as we sit now, is we will look at this period coming up. Yep. Okay. Members, everyone understanding of that? All for?
Aye.
Against carried. Okay, enterprise risk register. Okay, I'd like to move a second to move into confidential committee as a whole. Councillor Kingham, Councillor Kidman, thank you. Quick, isn't he? He's getting tip his boy, he wanted any water.
Yes.
This one with the red writing, confidential reports of offences.
Yes, yes.
Against carried, it was moved and seconded, thank you. Doors will close really quickly. We're back on, thank you. I'd like to ask the general manager to please the recommendations out, and I will obviously do that last one.
Mr. Chairman, on item 8, enterprise risk register, the council endorses the updated enterprise risk register as presented with some minor adjustments as discussed. With item 9, we biosecurity risk register extracts, the council notes the biosecurity risk register report to December 31st, 2020. So, we change it?
We should say the time of the working party.
Oh, sorry, and a number of issues to be referred to working party.
And in relation to the county chairman's confidential report on the performance review of the general manager half yearly, that the council notes the performance review committee's report on the general manager's performance for the period of 1 July 2020 to December 31st, 2020. Can I have a recommendation that the committee as a whole be adopted? Can I have a mover and seconder? Member McKibben, Member Fry, all for? Against carried. I declare the meeting closed at 4:49. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Lisa. What about
Sorry, I still.
that? Next meeting.